It is a beautiful Thursday morning here in downtown York. Thank you all for being here with us. Thank you to Ron Rumen, Press Secretary for Department of State, State Representative Eugene DePasquale, York County Commissioner Steve Chronister and Doug Hope, York City Councilwoman Joanne Borders, and other county officials. We have our Director of Elections here with us, Nikki Sikanik, as well as other community key leaders, the President of the BMA, the Black Ministers Association. We want to thank all of them for gathering here today, because this is a proactive message that we want to get out, we need to get out to engage our community, to provide the appropriate resources to ensure that everyone in York City and York County has the right to vote in the November election. Today we stand as representation of our community, that voter disenfranchisement will not occur, that people will be able to have the right to vote. The Pennsylvania voter ID law has forced several changes upon us that could lead to some alienation within our community, and that's why we are here today, to make sure people have the right information. We realize some may have varying opinions about this law, and that's not the issue that's before us. I charge us as a community to conduct ourselves in the spirit of a mighty people that christened the streets some 47 years ago in Selma, Alabama, until some other changes made, much like then by President Johnson, signing into law the Voters' Rights Act. We need to make sure people are educated here in our community, and must uproot ourselves with the same objectives. In the words of Nelson Mandela, education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. Therefore, again, I charge our community to present ourselves as advocates and as a resource to educate those in our community that are in need of obtaining the required identification to cast their ballot in this November election, and to form action groups within our community to ensure that that happens. Regardless of their origin, be it our faith-based organizations, community centers, neighborhood associations, or schools, we need all of you to mobilize and make these requirements very visible to our public. A community training session that will be conducted by the Department of State is scheduled to occur at the Community Progress Council, located at 226 East College Avenue here in the city, on Saturday, September the 8th, from 9 to noon. Individuals and community leaders will be provided with appropriate and accurate information to disperse to everyone, so that the right tools are put out there in our community, that they can walk into the voting polls on November the 6th and cast their ballots. So I thank all of you again for coming out. And for more information on the voter ID requirement and the upcoming training, you can visit the city's website at www.yorkcity.org. I am going to have other individuals speak this morning and ask them kindly to come forward. Again, our press secretary from the Department of State, Ron Rumen, and then we'll ask our state representative, Eugene DePasquale, to say a few words as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, good morning. On behalf of Secretary of the Commonwealth, Carol Achel, I do want to commend and thank the community leaders here in York County for taking this very positive and proactive step to get the word out about voter ID, to make sure that all the legal voters in York County are able to vote this November. The voter ID law, we believe, will protect the integrity of every vote by giving us a common sense, reliable way to verify the identity of each voter at the polls, something we don't have right now. This will help detect and deter illegal voting and make sure that each legal vote counts as it should to determine the outcome of elections. We think the law will increase citizens' confidence in our electoral process. We think most voters have acceptable IDs right now. These IDs include, if they have expiration dates which are not expired, any photo ID issued by the federal or Pennsylvania government, Pennsylvania driver's license, or a non-driver photo ID. These can be used for up to 12 months after their expiration dates for voting. A military ID, active or retired, and again, these must have expiration dates and not be expired, and a military ID which has a printed expiration date of indefinite is acceptable. Valid U.S. passports, photo IDs from accredited Pennsylvania colleges, universities, and seminaries, care facility IDs, including nursing homes, personal care homes, and assisted living facilities. So, Commissioner, we'd ask you to ask the folks at Pleasant Acres to help out and provide IDs for the folks out there if they need them. And employee IDs issued by the federal government, Pennsylvania, or a Pennsylvania county or municipality. And some of the college IDs which are acceptable for voting include York College, Penn State, including all the Commonwealth campuses, HAC, the state system of higher education, including Millersville, Shippensburg, Westchester, all those 14 schools, Elizabethtown, and Franklin and Marshall. Now, if you don't have any of these IDs, you can get one for free at any one of the 71 driver license centers around the state. And the one here in York County is at the South York Value Center, which is at 2130 South Queen Street. If you need an ID, there are 3 general categories in which you would fall to get an ID, and I'm going to briefly go over what you would need to do in each of those. And again, that information is available on our website, which is votespa.com, or you can call 1-877-VOTES-PA to get more information, and we're also on Twitter and Facebook. So if you ever had a Pennsylvania driver's license, and this will particularly help many of our seniors who may not drive anymore, if you had a license at one point and it's expired and been expired for more than 12 months, because again, you can use them for up to 12 months after they expire to vote, then you're on the fast track to get an ID. If you have an expired license, all you need to do is go into one of the PennDOT driver license centers, give them your name and your birth date, and they'll find you in the system. You're still there, and you don't need to provide any proof of identification or residence because you did that with PennDOT when you got your license. They'll update your address if need be, they'll take your picture, and you'll go home with your free ID that day. So that's very important. We want to get the word out to especially seniors who may have stopped driving 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 years ago. You don't even need the expired license itself. You're still in the system, so you'll be good to go. If you're a Pennsylvania native and you never had a driver's license or a non-driver photo ID, when you go to the PennDOT Driver License Center, you'll need a Social Security card and 2 proofs of residence. It can be a utility bill, a tax bill, a lease, can be a magazine subscription that comes to your home, has your name and your address on it. You'll give them your name, your date of birth, where you were born, and your parents' names. Then PennDOT will electronically verify your birth records with the Pennsylvania Department of Health. So you don't need to get the paper birth certificate if you don't have it. That will take up to 10 days, should be hopefully a little bit less, but up to 10 days. After that, you'll get a letter from PennDOT saying we verified your birth records and inviting you to come back to the PennDOT Center at your convenience. They'll take your picture and you'll get your free ID. Starting next week, we will be issuing Pennsylvania Department of State voter ID cards. And we believe with the issuance of these cards, any legal voter who wants an ID will be able to get one. These cards will be available for folks who will sign what's called an affirmation saying, I cannot get the documents I need to get a PennDOT ID. As we implemented this legislation, we did discover that there was a small group of folks who truly had a difficult time, and in some cases it was impossible for them to get, let's say, a birth certificate. If they were born in another state or another country, they may have contacted their place of birth and were simply told it doesn't exist. So to help these folks, we've created, starting next week, the Pennsylvania Department of State voter ID card. What you'll need for that is you'll go to the PennDOT Driver License Center, as with the other IDs. You'll need to give them a Social Security number. You don't need the card, a number, and 2 proofs of residence. They will then verify your voter registration record, so make sure you are a registered voter, because these cards will be for voting purposes only, and it will say that on the card. The other PennDOT IDs are good for any identification purposes, to going to the doctor, to cash a check, get on a plane, whatever you need an ID for. The PennDOT ones are good. These cards will clearly state for voting purposes only. So while you're there, PennDOT will verify that you are a registered voter. Once they do that, they'll match your Social Security number with that in the voter registration database, your 2 proofs of residence. They'll take your picture and you'll go home with your free ID. And one other option to keep in mind is that folks who truly have challenges getting to the polls and to PennDOT to get an ID, an absentee ballot is an option. And if you fill out on there that you have physical challenges, you don't drive, it's hard for you to get around, I mean, it's up to the county board of election, but I believe here in Pennsylvania, anyone who honestly says it is a great challenge for me to get to the polls and to get my ID, I think you can use absentee ballot as an option as well. And what I'd ask of the York community, as the mayor mentioned, of our churches, our civic leaders, our political parties, and our citizens, if you know someone who needs an ID and needs a ride to PennDOT, offer to take them. You know, we've still got 3 months just about till the election, well, 2.5 anyway. So offer to help someone get an ID if they need it. If you get a PennDOT ID, then you're good to vote for 5 years, because the IDs are good for 4 years and you can use them for up to 12 months after they expire. If you get the Department of State voter ID card, that's good for 10 years. So it's not like you have to run to PennDOT very often. So if you know someone that needs that ride, please help them to do that. And one other piece of information I want to clear up and be very clear on, because there's been a lot of misinformation out there about this recently. The law says that the name on your ID must substantially conform to the name on the voter records. It doesn't have to be an exact match. My legal name is Ronald George Ruman. If I have that on one of the let's say the voter rolls, but my license says Ronald Ruman and there's no middle initial, that's fine. If one of them says Ron Ruman, that's fine. If there's a typo in there somewhere, that's okay. So there, you know, some folks have been telling people
if I could add on that, Ron, a lot of that 750,000 number that you get from PennDOT, my middle name is Anthony on my voter registration, but on my birth certificate and my driver's license it's Antonio, which is Italian for Anthony. Right. That triggers actually my name being on that 750,000. But I mean, I can assure you, I'm going to be voting on election day. Yeah, we weren't trying to cut Gene out there. So, I would really want to get that word out there. It's very important, because there's been a lot of misinformation about that, and I think people are being frightened into thinking they aren't going to be able to vote. If you have a driver's license, you're going to be fine. And we spoke to, Secretary Achel spoke to the county election directors meeting in State College on Tuesday and passed on that information. We developed the training manuals for the county election directors for their election training with poll workers, and we're mailing that information to every poll worker in Pennsylvania so that they'll have that. Basically what we're saying is use common sense. If the person shows up, the name substantially conforms, the picture matches, the address is the same, that person is who they say they are. If you need an ID to vote in Pennsylvania, you can get one for free. And we really hope that all legal voters do get IDs, and we hope that folks will do what they can to help their friends, neighbors, their fellow churchgoers, their family members to get to PennDOT to get an ID. And as Secretary Achel emphasized to the county election officials at College on Tuesday, no one should be turned away from the polls this November. If you're a legally registered voter and you don't have your ID, you can cast a provisional ballot, and you then have 6 days to get a copy of that photo ID to the county election office. You can take it in, you can mail it in, you can email it, you can fax it. So no one should be turned away. Again, on behalf of Secretary Achel and Governor Corbett, we want to commend all the community leaders here in York County for taking this very proactive step to get the word out and spread the word and help make sure their citizens can vote on November 6th. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the mayor for pulling this press conference together and for all the people participating. I want to specifically thank Ron Ruman for the way he has handled this from the public relations side at the Department of State. As we all know, this is, you know, has been a very, let's just say, tense debate throughout the process. And I think his tone in getting out the information has been right on. And the mayor's point at the beginning of this is exactly right. Whether people agree or disagree with the law, it is the law, and it's now time to make sure that everyone gets the appropriate form of identification so they can cast their vote. And there's two things I want to stress on this. One is, if anybody has any questions about PennDOT forms or anything, or three things I want to stress. One is they can call my legislative office at 848-9595. Some of the forms we actually have there. We can't get them the ID, but we have a lot of the forms. That's number one. Number two, and Ron touched on this briefly, the political parties, I don't want to speak for the Republican Party, but I can certainly speak for the Democrats, but I'm sure the Republican Party is the same. If people need a ride to the driver's license center, the York County Democratic Party, now again, I'm not trying to be partisan, I'm sure the Republicans are doing the same thing, will get them a ride to the polling place, just like when people need a ride to the polls on Election Day. I mean, so there are volunteers that have already been put in place. The parties, both parties, I know, and not saying, I know the minor parties have been doing it too, and the other third parties, and the independent parties have been doing it too. And state legislators across the state have been getting postcards and making phone calls from a nonpartisan standpoint to get people this information. Third, I want to point out that at least from the statewide coverage, and I understand this, has been, no matter how many more maybe Democrats fall into this category on the 750,000 from PennDOT. But this is not just a Democratic issue. In the 4th Congressional District, from that 750,000 number on PennDOT, there are actually more registered Republicans that are on that list from the 4th Congressional District than registered Democrats. And what I mean by that is, do not think that this is only a Democratic or Republican or independent issue. There are people that fall into this situation that may not have the right form of ID that are all across the political spectrum. On Election Day, all of us here stand in agreement on one thing, not that we don't agree on other issues, but on one thing. We want every eligible voter to vote. And we have now a window of time to make sure that everyone that doesn't have that ID gets that ID. We have resources at the county level, at the state level. We have obviously the faith-based community, the city administration, state legislators. Utilize this information, utilize us as resources to make sure that if you don't have what you need and you intend to vote on Election Day, utilize all the resources that are available to make sure you get this ID so that you can cast that vote on Election Day. Again, I want to thank the mayor for pulling this together. Certainly thank Ron for being here and representing the Corbett administration. And I don't know, is anybody else going to be speaking? And with that, I think we'll take any questions.
Thank you.
I don't want to. The question was, are there any Republicans up there? I don't want to speak for everyone from the registration side of it, but I do know, because Ron's been a friend of mine for years, I do know he's a registered Republican. When the curtain closes, nobody knows what we do in the ballot box. I mean, so I don't want to stress how people are voting here, but Ron is a registered Republican and is from York County and is here and is representing the Corbett administration.
That's right.
In the 4th Congressional, not statewide. In statewide, and again, when we talk about this, these are people that are on that PennDOT list, which, again, I outline, I think that's actually a higher number than what actually exists. Because I know, like the Democratic leader in the House, his driver's license is Francis Dermody. He's registered as Frank Dermody. Good luck denying him and nobody would do it. I mean, like, this is where sort of reality has to meet what is a statistic. But in the 4th Congressional District, partly because there's just more registered Republicans here than Democrats, the number is actually about 30,000 registered Republicans, about 20,000 Democrats in this congressional district that, again, are on that PennDOT list. It doesn't mean they don't have the right form of ID, but are on that list.
If I could just take 1 minute to talk about where that list came from. This spring, we wanted to get the word out from the Department of State to people that might not have IDs to let them know. The only way we could come up with any group of people that might not have IDs was to run a match between the voter registration database and the PennDOT database. These are two huge databases, each with several million names in it, that were set up by two different departments for two different reasons. So when we put them together, they didn't match exactly. As Eugene has said, you have a different middle initial, or a middle name's a little different, or you have a nickname on one. They didn't match. So the number of registered voters that showed up as not matching in the PennDOT ID database was about 759,000. Out of that number, about 167,000 are what are called inactive voters. They haven't voted in at least 5 years. Our experience says most of them don't live in Pennsylvania anymore. They moved but never canceled their voter registration. But they're still on the list. What we do after 5 years is send them a letter. We give them another 2 federal elections, or another 4 years. If we don't hear or they don't vote, then they're removed from the rolls. But so about 22% of that list probably don't live here anymore. Out of the remainder, many of them we knew did have PennDOT IDs, but we couldn't separate that out, and we wanted to err on the side of caution, so we mailed a lot of people letters that didn't need them in order to get the folks who did. And it also didn't catch anyone else that has other IDs. Student IDs, I mentioned a lot of the colleges. I want to thank them. A lot of the colleges, including Penn State, York College, Temple, and the state system, since the law passed, have said they will make their IDs usable for their students. So they've stepped forward, military IDs, the care facility IDs. So that number, we didn't do it to get a number. We did it to get letters out to people that might need to know about this because they didn't have IDs. Unfortunately, it got kind of characterized as 750,000 people don't have IDs, and that's not true. Not to speak for, I think that's, but that also, I mean, take for example myself. I talked about my middle birth name is Antonio. Anthony is on my voter registration. I also have a state house ID that's
issued by the Commonwealth with an expiration date that says Eugene Anthony. So even if for some reason somebody raised an issue with me on my driver's license, I have my Commonwealth issued ID. So not only was that 750,000 high, but there may be people that also have other forms of ID that are part of that number. I was on the list. I mean, I was one of the 750,000, again, because I believe it's because my middle name didn't precisely match up.
I won't say we're getting a lot of calls, but the angst is out there, and we want to address it as early as we can in the beginning. So again, it's imperative that folks come out to that community training session and learn as much as they can about it, take back to their communities, take back to their organizations, so that people are less anxious about the process. But the bottom line is we want everyone to vote. Anyone that has the ability, 18 years and above, to be able to vote, and we're not looking at any specific demographics there. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? The question was, is there any concern about the poll workers taking on additional responsibility? One of the things that they've already, when you're the first time voter in a new precinct anyway, you already have to show some form of identification anyway. So it's not a dramatically new requirement in that sense in Pennsylvania. Now the photo part of it is different, but I think Nikki's one of the best election officials in the entire Commonwealth, and I know there's going to be an enormous amount of training coming from the Department of State. I don't think there's any single person that I know of that doesn't want the person elected the next president of the United States, whether it's Governor Romney or President Obama, to be the one that got the most votes. I mean, that's what we all want. And so now it's just time to make sure to implement it. I would say it's not angst. It's just we know we have work to do to make sure that that happens. It's not angst, it's work, and we just need to make sure the work gets done.
And if I could echo what Eugene said, I think that's exactly right. The Secretary spoke to the gathering of statewide county election directors this week in State College, and we only heard from those folks so far that there have been 2 poll workers who have said that they didn't want to do this anymore because of the law. In fact, one of the election directors said he talked that person out of it because he reminded him, as Eugene said, you've had to ask first-time voters for ID for 10 years. And over the last 10 years, because of what happened in Florida in 2000, there was a federal law passed called the Help America Vote Act, which resulted in all new voting machines. And that was a big change because there were a lot of counties in Pennsylvania that still had the paper ballots. So we had to get those folks to go to electronic voting, and I imagine anybody who was involved with that could tell you that was rough. I think that was going to be a lot rougher than this.
That was a problem.
Yeah, and I think really if folks use common sense, people have the IDs out. In the primary, we had a soft rollout, so we called it, where people were asked for their IDs but didn't have to have it. And I saw, a story in the Scranton Times that one of the poll workers up there said it actually helped her because she could see the person's name and it was easier to find them in the poll book then. And there can be challenges anyway in the lawsuit that we've been through on this. The election director for Allegheny County said that 2 years ago he was challenged on his signature, and he resolved that by showing them his photo ID. So this kind of thing has happened before. It was always up to the poll worker and the judge of election really to make the call as to whether any voter could vote. So I think with a photo ID, I hope, and I don't feel it should be a big difference.
If anybody can sign D. Pasquale precisely like me, they deserve a medal, but that's a separate issue, Sam.
Well, throughout all this, and one of the things I've said, if we were relying on the signature for identification verification, that there would be no medical doctor in the United States would ever vote.
All right, anything else? Hey, thank you very much, everyone.